Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on product management in SAFe, building solutions that delight our customers. This is the second webinar in our free webinar series that we're organizing from ValueGlide. And in the following hour, we will explore product management in SAFe, building solutions that delight our customers, as I just said. We'll have a look at Lean Enterprises' focus on delivering the right solutions to customers with the highest quality in the shortest sustainable lead time. This requires people with explicit content authority to take responsibility for continuously defining, prioritizing, and validating requirements. Working closely with development, in short, integrated learning cycles, product management bring the voice of the customers to the developers and the voice of the development to the customer. So we'll explore in the coming hour how SAFe uses Kanban systems to create alignment from strategy to execution, setting a vision, creating a roadmap, and continuously exploring customer needs, defining an MVP and writing and prioritizing features, as well as balancing business features whilst also investing in architectural runway. So my name is Emma Cetilius. I work at ValueGlide with marketing and business development. But our presenters today are Nader Talai, business agility consultant at ValueGlide with over 17 years of experience in Agile, helping clients with their Agile transformation through trainings and coaching. Now they will explore the mentioned topics together with Andrew Sales, senior consultant at SAFe program consultant. With Andrew Sales, senior consultant and SAFe program consultant trainer at Scaled Agile. Scaled Agile is the creator of the Scaled Agile framework, which has become the world's leading framework for enterprise agility. So I will hand over the word now to Nader and to Andrew, and I hope you will really enjoy the upcoming hour. Thank you.
Hi, Emma. Thanks. Okay, in 2009, I was the head of technology development for a successful company. I spent the first couple of weeks finding out what was going on. I spoke to many stakeholders, spoke to the head of departments in finance, marketing, sales, product development, operations, project management, and many team members, as well as my own team. What I discovered was that we had lots of projects and product ideas, unclear prioritization methods, and no visibility of the project flow, with lots of in-flight projects, slow releases, and poor quality. In today's webinar, we will cover how SAFe provides a framework to help avoid this scenario. So questions I have for you is, do you know what are your organization's delivery capabilities in terms of how many initiatives you can launch in a month? Can you see where the initiatives are in the workflow? That is, are they started, developed, tested, verified, on hold? Do you know what needs your attention? You're not alone. I work with many organizations where there is no or limited understanding of the delivery capability and visibility of how the work is flowing, which leads to long delays, slow time to market, poor quality, and overburdened and disengaged staff. We all get a lot of demand that we need to attend to, and we need a system of work that helps us see where our attention is needed most and act to improve the flow of value to our customers, with measures that are aligned with our purpose and guide us to provide feedback on the effectiveness of our actions. SAFe provides a framework that enables us to manage flow, prioritize work, measure, make better decisions, problem solve, and lead. Improving flow through visualization, reduced batch size, and limited work in progress. We prioritize using weighted shortest job first and measures for PI predictability, that's program increment predictability, delivery rate, lead time, failure demand, and leading indicators of success. With regular problem solving through retrospectives and problem solving workshops at the end of each planning increment, leaders and provide leaders who are lean thinking managers. That is, they spend the time to learn and then coach and challenge and grow team members and lead the transformation. As we can see, SAFE provides a framework that addresses the challenges that we mentioned above. So let's dive a little bit deeper and see some of the aspects of SAFE, starting with prioritization. So before we go there, SAFE delivers the business results that you can see on the screen. Now let's delve a little bit deeper and have a look at the prioritization within SAFE. So SAFE prioritization is based on cost of delay. And in his book, Don Reinhartson says that if there is only one measure you use cost of delay. And as you can see in this slide here, we have 4 different visualizations of cost of delay. Starting from the top right, where peak is unaffected, if we delay a delivery, the value we lose is the area under these 2 curves. That usually we can simplify as a rectangle, which is the width, which is the number of days that it was delayed, and the height being the value that we expected to gain, and that gives us an idea of the cost of delay. There is another version of this, is the peak affected. This is where we have lost market share that we will not gain, and it is similar, it's just that the height of the rectangle, if you like, it's lower. Top left, we have a perishable good. This is where we have products or services that we're delivering that are time critical. For example, if launching something for Christmas. Now, ideally, you want that to be available around September. If you delay the delivery of that product to the shops, let's say, and you get it beginning of December, you get a little bit of value. Of course, if you miss Christmas altogether, then there is no value to be gained. Bottom left is the fixed state. That is where there is a time at which you need to deliver. If you deliver early, there is no benefit. What you may have caused is opportunity cost. In other words, you have deprived other initiatives from gaining value. And then if you miss the time, you lose all the value or you get penalized and you have to pay a penalty. Now, SAFE uses a modified version of the weighted shortest job first, which is based on relative cost of delay. First of all, let's define the cost of delay, and that is the cost of delay divided by job duration, that's what the weighted shortest job is. Now, in SAFE, we calculate the cost of delay by adding the relative business value, time criticality, risk reduction, or opportunity enablement, and that number, if you like, those 3 items, dimensions added together, give us the cost of delay. And we use the job size or relative job size as a proxy for job duration. And this gives us the priority within SAFE. So we decide on what to do based on the WSJF, weighted shortest job first, or WSJF calculation that comes up. Now let's look at improved flow. So we need to improve flow through visualization and focus. In physical work, we can see and look at the progress and see how queues are building up, where work is flowing and where it's not, and where parts are building up. In knowledge work, work is invisible. We cannot see the workflow. So we need to represent work with tokens, and we need to then visualize the workflow and show the flow using these tokens that are representatives of work, so we can see where the work is at, how long it's staying at a given state. Is it aging? Is it flowing? Is it impeded because we got it blocked, or intervention is required by us or by management or leadership? And we can see how we are delivering, what is our capability. We can use our delivery capability measures to guide us on showing how much work we can finish, which ensures that we focus on what matters and limit the work in progress, and we only start work when we have capability and availability to deliver it. By reducing the amount of work in progress, we reduce the lead time. In other words, we serve our customers quicker, and we can deliver more. Where would you rather be? As you can see on this diagram, the diagram on the left, the picture on the left, has got a lot of work in progress. And the one on the right has optimal amount of work in progress. So if we start a lot of work and we focus on starting, we get the situation on the left-hand side. And if we focus on finishing, we have the situation on the right-hand side. So within SAFE, and we create Kanban systems as a way of creating a pull-based system. In other words, we limit the number of tokens that are available, and we focus on finishing and not starting. So in SAFE, we have 3 Kanban systems, as you can see the highlighted ones here, at the portfolio level, at the program level, and the team level Kanban as well that teams can use. In this webinar, we're going to focus on the portfolio and the program level. So these 2 levels. So the portfolio Kanban provides the organization with a holistic view of the portfolio of initiatives. Kanban systems are pull-based systems of work, meaning we focus on what matters, limit the amount of work that is started, and increase our organization's ability to complete them. So what flows through the portfolio Kanban are epics, and we have 2 types of epics, enabler epics and business epics. Andrew is going to cover the enabler epics a bit later on. So epics, and we in our last webinar, we covered what the epic template is and how we write it, but in here it's just very quick reminder that epics are container of solution developments. They're large enough to require analysis, and we need to have a minimum, we need to define a minimum viable product, MVP, and they need funding, and they grow as they work through the funnel, which I will show as a portfolio Kanban in a minute. So we can show that funnel as a portfolio Kanban, as you can see on this slide, where we have options coming in from the left, and then we review, we analyze, and they hit the portfolio backlog. And the question we're asking ourselves within this part of the flow is, should we invest? Is this worth investing? Is this epic worth investing in? And on the right-hand side is, should we stop investing? In other words, should we continue investing, or have we got enough benefit out of this and we should move and pivot to something else? Or the early indicators are proving that the hypothesis was invalid, therefore we can stop. As you can see on this board, we can discard epics at any stage. And we discard them because when we discover that there is not enough value, therefore we're not going to carry on. So this representation here is showing some epics in flight, and as you can see, E1 at the moment has the top of the list because the WSJIF, the weighted shortage of first evaluation, has put E1 as being the top of the queue that needs doing. So now we need to break it down. E1 is broken down into an MVP epic, which we get E1-1 if you like. And it needs to, we've defined the MVP, and now we need to wait for a pull signal from our program Kanban to say, yes, we got availability and we can carry on and deliver E11, the MVP that we've just defined. So we wait for the pull signal, and here's the program Kanban. We're showing it as empty, so we've just finished the PI, or the very first one. Therefore, we now ask for the MVP. The pull signal goes up. As you can see here, we received the pull signal, and the MVP has now moved from define to implement, as you can see on this workflow. We now, if you like, create a copy of that within the portfolio, within the program Kanban. And now we need to say, okay, we now got the MVP epic here. We need to go through PI content readiness, which means we need to understand what features make up that epic. And this visualization here shows the interaction between program Kanban and the portfolio Kanban, the pull signal going up from the program Kanban, and then resulting in from the epic, MVP epic, moving from define to implement, and then getting a copy of it within the program Kanban. So now we got the MVP epic, and we need to go through our PI content readiness, although we show it in here as one hit. Content readiness is a continuous activity that we do. It's not just one hit, but for purposes of this illustration, we can now see that the epic is now broken down into features, F1 to F5, and then we got F6, F7, and F8 that are features that have come up at the program level. So teams or program have come up with these features that have also, as you can see, they are in priority order based on the VisGIF calculation. So now we got our features ready for our PI planning. Now we are ready to start our PI planning. We go to our PI planning, and the teams do their PI planning and come up with the result of that PI planning is that we can take all the MVP features and features F6 and F7 for this PI, but not F8. So now we start to iterate and deliver. So we start iterating, so we do our iteration planning, and part of that iteration planning, the teams would have gone to their iteration planning, they would have picked stories, and in this illustration, they have obviously picked stories that are from the MVP epic F1, F2, and F3, and therefore that's why the epic has now, these three features have moved into next. So we are going to be working on them after the iteration planning, we pull them in. So we now start executing on the iteration, and as we work through the iteration, these features are delivered. And then we now go to iteration 2, and we do our iteration planning. We pick up the F4 feature, and again, it goes through our system, and we deliver it. We go through another iteration planning for iteration 3. We pick up F5 and F6, features 5 and 6. We work on them, and we deliver them. And we F6 we didn't finish within this iteration. So now in iteration planning 4, we get F7 in, and we start delivering them. So we finish the PI with all the features that we committed to delivered. So what measures can we have that help us? One good measure to have is the cumulative flow diagram, and in here I'm showing a very simplified version of it, just the delivery, what is delivered and what is started. So this cumulative flow shows us what is the delivery rate, as you can see at the bottom here on the blue curve, is showing our ability, what is our ability to deliver stuff. And if we start more than we can deliver, we get a divergence between started and delivered. The amount of work in progress, which you can see here, grows, as you can see in this part of the graph, which means the lead time, in other words, if I start one of these, grows. The lead time gets longer and longer. Another way of putting it is that WIP, the amount of work in progress, is an early indicator of the lead time. How long do I have to wait for it to come out? So that's one of the measures, which is cumulative flow. We're just going to touch on another one, which is the scatter plot. So we can plot features, epics, stories on a scatter plot. So what this one is showing is, again, as you can see, days to complete is on the y-axis, and these are days. So we can see it ranges from pretty much 0 to anything up to 160 days or just 160 days. And what you can see on this graph, again, is that I have shown in here your 10th percentile, 50th percentile, and 90th percentile. So what this means is that we, with 90th percentile confidence, we can say that we can finish a feature within 65 days or less. So it is important that it is within 65 days or less. And what these are outliers. So yes, sometimes they might go over that, but they're outliers and they will have an assignable cause, and we can work on those in our problem-solving workshop to tackle the sources of those delays and bring them more in line, and also overall improve our system of work. What other measures we have, which we haven't got in this presentation, are feature deployment time, failure demand, problem identification to resolution time, number of releases, recovery time. You can find more about the measures and the metrics on the Scaled Agile website on the link here, which I'm not going to click on, but you will find them over there. So at this point, I hand over to Andy. Andy.
Thank you, Nada. I'm just going to take the screen sharing. Just give me a second. And can you just let me know if you can see my PowerPoint okay?
We can see it perfectly. Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, so Nada's explained how we can visualize the flow of work within SAFe using the portfolio and the program Kanban systems. So what I now want to cover is how do we actually govern that work? So I'm going to start by having a look at the role of product management within SAFe. Then we'll have a look at how we define and evaluate features. And then finally, we'll finish just by having a look at how we can create alignment across the organization through the use of a vision and a roadmap. So one good place to start is just by connecting the responsibilities of product management to the portfolio Kanban system that Nada showed us earlier. And what we're seeing on the slide here is a prototypical or an example portfolio Kanban. It's got a number of states from left to right, and each of those states has got some sample exit policies added to them. But the important point for this presentation is at the top here, where you can see the Epic owner, which is easily thought of as the sponsor of these large initiatives, takes them from the funnel through to the go, no-go decision, which happens after a period of analysis. But once the Epic is actually transitioned into the portfolio backlog, that's where product management take over the content authority. And ultimately, the product manager, in collaboration with the product owners, are going to be the ones that drive this Epic through to completion. They'll be the ones helping to understand what are the features we need to deliver in order to meet the business outcomes defined within that Epic. And it's this very specific work of defining and delivering the features that I want to explore in this section. So maybe one good place to start is just by orientating ourselves within the SAFe framework. And what you can see highlighted on the slide here is the program level. And it's within the program level that product management reside. And of course, they're focused on the ongoing solution and product development. This program level also is where we coordinate the teams that are ultimately going to be doing the work to deliver these features. And the combination of this program level with the team level below it is what we call within SAFe the Agile release train. Sometimes we call it ART for short. And there's one other thing I just want to highlight on this slide before we move on, which is that continuous delivery pipeline. We're going to come back to this in a bit more detail later, but this represents all of the activities and processes that are needed to go from exploring customer requirements to delivering that value and releasing that value to the customers. Okay, so let's just start by quickly having a look at some of the product manager responsibilities within SAFe. And this is a very critical role. So the product manager is absolutely responsible for identifying both the customer needs and also business opportunities. As mentioned previously, they're working with the epic owners to support the successful implementation of those portfolio epics. And they're also continuously developing and communicating both a vision and roadmap as a way of creating alignment across the development teams and across the wider organization. We'll see shortly how they create features, and Nada talked a little bit about how we prioritize those features using weighted shortest job first in the program backlog. And then importantly, they have a role to play to ensure the right amount of work is flowing through those program Kanban systems, making sure they're not getting overloaded. And as the features move near to completion, the product manager is the one who ultimately accepts them as done. And finally, this last point on the slide is very important. It's really important that the product manager works hard to develop and build an effective product management, product ownership team. And we're going to see in a minute that it's actually the combination of these two roles that is going to help us ultimately be successful with the solution development. And maybe just with that in mind, it's worth just pausing to think about an important question, which is why do we actually have a separate product manager, product owner role within SAFe? And the critical point here is, given the responsibilities that we just looked at, it just isn't possible for one person to be dedicated both to the Agile team, as in the case of the product owner, and also dedicating themselves to the more strategic side of Agile product management, which is the case in the role of product management. The other thing we need to be very careful about here is that if we don't have the right number of people in these roles, we can actually start to develop bottlenecks, which are going to ultimately hamper our ability to deliver value to our customers. So there's some recommendations on this slide. They're not meant to be anything more than that, but we often see that a product owner can support maximum 2 teams. And in scenarios where we have a lot of product owners and a large number of teams, it's often the case that we have a small product management team made up of a number of product managers that are helping to coordinate and support the strategic alignment. That's going to be the case very likely when we're developing complex solutions, or perhaps where the solution we're developing is part of a larger solution itself. Okay, so now let's have a look in more detail about the process that SAFe implements in order to help product management define and evaluate these features. And what you can see on this slide here is that continuous delivery pipeline that we mentioned previously. And we've expanded the continuous exploration section. So there's 4 parts to the continuous delivery pipeline. There's continuous exploration, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail in a minute. There's the continuous integration, which is the teams developing, testing, and integrating the code. There's the continuous deployment, which is about deploying that code through our deployment pipeline and ultimately into production. And then there's the decision and the activity to release on demand. And this is a business decision. When do we want to allow our users to get access to that code, those features that we've deployed? But continuous exploration, which is what we're going to look at now, this describes the processes that the product manager is concerned with. And these are the processes of continuously and constantly exploring both the market and the user needs. So there's a lot of critical work going on in here. There's customer visits, there's opportunities to watch the customer using the existing solution and observe their behaviors. There's market and industry research. In short, we're trying to generate the information and the inputs here that will ultimately help us define a set of features. And it's the product manager's role to synthesize that information into that set of features. Now, the next step is then to take that information and run it through the Lean UX process. The Lean UX process, defined in the book of the same name, is implemented within SAFe. And this is the process that allows us to develop and deliver functionality in minimum viable increments, but also importantly, determine success by measuring the results of that delivery against benefits hypotheses that we've specified previously. So the whole point here is what we're trying to do is get immediate feedback to understand if the solution we're building and the features we're developing really do meet the business objectives we specified. And as you can see on this slide, Lean UX provides this closed loop system that helps us both define and then measure value continuously. And as I mentioned previously, SAFe implements this process within the framework. Okay, so we're going to step through this process now, one stage at a time. And the very first stage or step within the process is defining the feature. Within SAFe, features have a short phrase that give them a name, some context, and then critically, they have this benefit hypothesis that I just mentioned. And this is describing the proposed measurable benefit to the end user or potentially to the business if we're developing for internal consumption. The other reason why this benefit hypothesis is so important is it really accepts the reality that in many cases, there is no one right answer that we can know up front. So it avoids creating big upfront design. It helps us to think about the hypothesis and then drive the behaviors to test those hypotheses once we deliver the features to our end users. The other important thing just to say here about the size of features, within SAFe, we're very clear, we must size features to fit within a program increment. And a program increment is roughly 10 to 12 weeks. So no features are ever going to take longer than that period of time. And you can see some examples here on this slide. I'm not going to read through them all, but you see the feature and you can see the associated benefits hypothesis. Perhaps one important point just to make at this stage is that when we come to measure the outcome, we're going to be most successful if we can define the benefit hypothesis using leading indicators. In other words, indicators that can start to give us feedback as early as possible. And in this example here, this first example where it talks about the multi-factor authentication, you could easily understand how we could continuously measure and monitor security breaches as a way of evaluating whether we are or are not meeting this expectation of increased security enhancement. Okay, so the next part of the process is what we call collaborative design. So it's the collaborative design step. And traditionally, when we think about UX design, it's often been an area of specialization, but Lean UX really focuses on bringing in multiple viewpoints, including the product managers, the product owners. And in addition, Lean UX asks us to focus on not only the needs of the end users or the external customers, but also think about any internal users as well. So how are the teams working in the operational part of the business going to be interacting with these systems? And of course, most importantly, given that a huge amount of the knowledge about these systems resides with the Agile teams, we want to empower the teams themselves to actually carry out this collaborative UX design and ultimately the implementation of those designs. This is going to speed up decision making, it's going to reduce time to market, it's ultimately going to provide better business outcomes. But this presents a certain challenge. So if we're trying to decentralize some of this decision making to the teams, how do we square that with the other important goal of UX, which is to deliver a consistent user experience across a whole range of products that we might be providing to the market? So again, it's a balance between the decentralized decision making and some kind of centralized control. And the solution to this is the design system. And it's mentioned in this last bullet point on the slide. And a design system is a set of standards that helps create this centralized control. And some examples might be editorial style guides. Maybe there's some branding and corporate identity kits. Maybe there's a library of different UI assets and widgets that can be applied as we create additional designs. Once we've defined the hypothesis, and once we have an understanding of the design, the next step is to actually proceed to implement the functionality. And we do this in what we call a minimum marketable feature. So what we mean by a minimum marketable feature is thinking about what is the thinnest slice or the smallest part of this feature that we can actually build to learn or validate whether this benefits hypothesis was met or not. And this is going to look very different depending on the kind of feature. For some features, this could be extremely lightweight prototypes, perhaps even paper prototypes that we're taking out to our customers to validate. In other scenarios, it might be that we can build a portion of the feature to get early feedback, And of course, in some cases, both those scenarios will be impossible. We may need to develop the whole feature itself before we can generate feedback data from our customers using it in a production environment. Just in terms of how we actually go about this, and to make it clear how this functions within SAFe, the way we actually deliver these minimum marketable features is by breaking the feature down into smaller user stories. So the features are the work item that resides at the program level. They sit within the program backlog. It's the user stories that the feature is decomposed into that the teams manage in their team backlogs, and it's ultimately those user stories that the teams deliver. Once we deliver enough of them, then we can say the feature itself is complete. And of course, just in the same way we make the features small enough to fit within a PI, within a 12-week time box, we want to make the stories nice and small to fit within an iteration. So typically 2 weeks. And some of these stories will develop and deliver segments of business value. We typically call those user stories. Others will be much more technical in nature, and we tend to call those enablers. Things like exploration, architecture, infrastructure, compliance, for example. The final step, and the really critical step then, is to close the loop. Once we've implemented a feature within SAFe, we have to evaluate the outcomes. And of course, there's going to be different ways of doing this. The ideal way, and something we should strive for whenever possible, is actually observing the users interacting with the system in person. So we can see how they're using it, we can observe their behaviors, we can see any struggles they might be having. If this isn't possible, then we can look to things like surveys, questionnaires, trying to gather feedback from a wider group of users. And of course, one of the benefits we have these days is to be able to build in telemetry to the systems we're developing. And that way we can actually see in real time which of the features are being used by the end users, which ones perhaps are being ignored. The final point on the slide is particularly interesting and something that a lot of teams are considering these days. How can we actually do A/B testing where we release perhaps, let's say, 2 different interfaces for a feature that we've developed and allow customers to select, providing statistical feedback on which one is most popular? And I think wherever it's economically viable, this is a particularly important technique to use, particularly for those critical user activities. Whatever technique we use, though, the important point is that this measurement closes that system, creates the closed loop process that we showed earlier, and ultimately it's this closed loop process that ensures we can successfully iterate towards our desired outcomes, knowing that we're backed by customer evidence, which is incredibly important. Okay, so we had a look at the product manager role. We've talked now about the lean UX process within SAFe, how we define and evaluate features. I just want to say a few things in conclusion now about how we actually capture and communicate the results of this continuous customer exploration in order to create alignment not only across the teams, the release train, but also the wider business. And just going back to that continuous exploration slide that we looked at in a minute, we looked at earlier, we already saw how the product manager synthesizes the information they've gathered into a set of features, but they also need to synthesize that information into a longer term vision and also a shorter term roadmap. And if we just think about the vision to start with, the vision provides us with a couple of things. It gives us that longer term context, which helps guide some of the near-term decisions that we're making. It's inspirational and motivational to the teams. It answers the question, why should we care about these solutions that we're working on? And of course, a good vision needs to make it very clear, what are the customer problems we're looking to solve? How are we going to differentiate ourselves from the competition? And also any important information we need to know about in terms of the market, the target market that we're releasing into, and any new business capabilities we might need to develop to support this solution development itself. There's many different ways of creating visions, and SAFe certainly isn't going to mandate one over the other. But one nice one that's shown on this slide is this postcard from the future. And this is imagining yourself at a future point in time once the solution has been released and thinking about what is the effect it's had on the market, what are people saying about it, how do we know that we've been successful? And we try and describe all these observations in a very concise way thinking about a postcard to try and get that message across very concisely and clearly. The other nice benefit about this particular approach of taking a point of view from the future is it really moves the teams from focusing on whether it's possible to actually achieve these goals to thinking about how they can apply their strengths to help us get there. And the other nice benefit of this technique is because we're looking back from a future state, it's also a great way of uncovering potential risks and pitfalls that we might encounter along the way, and then we can start to create plans to help to mitigate those. Now, the product manager, when they create this vision, they need to consider a large number of inputs, and some of these are just shown on this slide here. The strategic themes in the top right-hand corner, they're defining the longer-term strategy at the portfolio level, and any vision needs to be able to connect and show how it's helping to deliver those strategic themes. Customers, of course, as we've just seen, are providing constant feedback. That needs to be included in the vision. And also the architects, they're providing us critical technological guidance, particularly around things like feasibility. We need to make sure all of those viewpoints are captured within the vision as well. If we happen to be developing a solution which is part of a bigger solution, then within SAFE, we have concepts and elements such as the solution intent, the solution context, the solution backlog. In other words, how will our system fit into a larger system that's being developed? And then finally, and again, important to stress, the Agile teams are really the domain experts here. And primarily through the role of the product owner, they're continuously communicating emerging requirements, different viewpoints and opportunities that we absolutely need to capture in this product vision as well. Okay, so let's have a look then at the roadmap. And although we want to be responsive to change, roadmaps are critical to help us strengthen relationships between the organization, our customers, our suppliers. In other words, they're allowing our customers and suppliers to build plans around the expected dates and the key deliveries that are marked in the roadmap itself. You can see at the top here, there's some key milestones and major releases that are highlighted as well. And within SAFE, the guidance we normally say is that the roadmap needs to be long enough to run the business, so to help communicate some of these key pieces of information to our customers, but also short enough to allow us to be agile. So a typical SAFE roadmap is about 3 program increments. Each program increment is about 10 to 12 weeks. So typically you're looking about 30 weeks of work in this particular roadmap example on this screen. Now on the left-hand side, in the first PI, PI 3, this is a commitment because these are the objectives that the teams have committed to that have come out of the PI planning they've just completed. Beyond that though, PIs 4 and 5 are simply a forecast. This is simply highlighting the features that we're considering, knowing that the business or technical context could well change and the roadmap may very well need to be updated. Now, as well as communicating information to customers and suppliers, the other reason why the roadmap is so critical within SAFE is to ensure that we're building out an appropriate architecture runway to help support the ongoing development of business features. And that's just what I want to look at in the final few slides as I conclude this section. So we have this concept within SAFE of the architecture runway. And this is one of the tools that we use to really embed the concepts of Agile architecture. And it's going to consist of things like existing code, components, technical infrastructure. And really what it's trying to do is build out the foundations that allow us to continuously deploy and develop business features. It's created by the development of these enabler features, which we looked at earlier, things like exploration, infrastructure, compliance, and architecture. And it's the responsibility of the system architect to make sure those enabler features are prioritized and being developed, because those are the things that the business features will ultimately consume as though they're released as well. The important part of this slide is that last point where it says capacity allocation, because one of the challenges we have is how do we actually balance the work in the backlog for both the business features with the need to continuously invest in that architecture runway in the enabler features. And so to address this problem within SAFE, we have the concept of capacity allocation. And this is where we're defining how much of the effort for the upcoming PI can be allocated to each type of work. And we generally associate these also with a set of policies. You can see these on the right-hand side of the slide. The system architect has authority for the technical features, the product manager for the business features, but we agree to work collaboratively to do what's right for the business. Now, while those policies tend to persist for a long time, the actual capacity allocation is normally changed periodically. And we recommend that you have a look and assess this maybe once a PI, just to see if you need to make any adjustments. Okay, so we looked at the product manager role, we looked at the lean UX process, and we've now just finished by looking at the vision and the roadmap. I'm now going to hand it back to Nada, who's going to conclude the webinar before we open up for questions. Over to you, Nada.
Thanks, Andy. Let me just change presenters. Can you see my screen? Yes. Okay, so in conclusion, every successful organization has more ideas for new and improved services that it has capability to do so. We need a way of finding out what matters and deliver it with predictability. As you have seen, SAFe provides such a framework. So my call to action for you is focus and deliver what matters and have a safe journey. Now we open to questions, I think, before we come back to how Value Glide can help. Emma, have you got any questions?
Yes, we do have some questions. So at the beginning of the webinar, I forgot to say that, but some of you have already been writing in some questions anyway, about the fact that you can ask us questions. You have them to the right, probably, of your screen, where you can write the questions and we will answer them. We have about 7 minutes to answer some of the questions that have already come in. So please don't hesitate to take the time and ask us some questions. Let me see if we can have Nader and Andrew perhaps join us as well by camera so that we see who we're speaking with. And we'll start looking at the first question. 1 second. Great. Okay, so the first question we have, I think I'm going to direct this one to Andrew. How do we forecast the number of features we can deliver in a program increment in order to build out the roadmap?
Can you hear me okay, Emma?
We can hear you.
Yeah, I've just clicked onto my webcam. It's just taking a minute to load, but it should come through in a minute.
Okay, great. We can hear you fine though.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the things we didn't really focus on too much was the Agile release train. And in particular, we talked about it, but what we didn't talk about was the fact that the Agile release train is ideally long-lived. So it's a team of teams between 50 and 125 people, and we're trying to keep them together as long as possible to allow us to do better forecasting as those teams get better in terms of predicting the amount of work they can commit to. Now, Nada talked about some of the different metrics within SAFe, and one of the key metrics at the release train level is the predictability measure. And at the end of every PI, the teams reflect, did we make and meet our commitments? If we didn't, how can we improve the ways we work to get better at making and meeting our commitments? And ultimately, it's that long-term commitment to improving predictability that's going to allow us to forecast. We're going to be able to say long-term across the Agile release train, on average, how many story points, for example, do they deliver within a PI? And then features, just like stories, can be sized in points by comparing them to other features which we delivered previously. And of course, features will be larger than stories, so the number of story points attached to any feature will be larger, and we can adjust the estimates based on things like complexity and uncertainty. So ultimately, the answer to the question is, as to how we forecast is we get a good understanding of the capacity of the release train based on their adherence to increasing predictability, and then we estimate our features in a very similar way to stories. Don't forget, though, it's not until we actually leave the PI planning that we have a commitment to that first PI. And of course, the roadmap is nothing more than a forecast. Things can always change. But hopefully that's just helpful as a quick overview of that process.
Great. So we have another question here that has come in from Alan Owen, who's with us as well. What size of organization would typically adopt SAFe? I know I can direct that question to either one of you, so whoever feel like they want to answer it, please go ahead. I can even answer it myself, but you go ahead, Nader.
Or Andy, doesn't really matter. Yes, so size of organization could be anything. I mean, so if you look at the Agile release train, which is the, if you like, the heart of SAFe, we're looking at anything from 50 to 125 people. So if you got 50 people, then you can use SAFe. It's important. I guess what is important is that you have a heavy technology or development bias, so that those 50 people are mostly working in developing software products. Andy, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of things. So the 50 people that Nada mentions is really the lower bound, if you like, below which it probably doesn't make sense to be thinking about too much additional processes. But SAFe itself scales up. So although an Agile release train is about 125 people, if we have a solution that we're developing that needs thousands of practitioners, SAFe provides guidance for coordinating multiple release trains. So there's no real limit, and we're seeing some very large organizations, in particular those with a mix of both hardware and software, using and applying SAFe. And one thing you might have seen on a slide that Nada showed earlier is SAFe has the idea of different configurations. So in very small contexts, you can use the essential SAFe configuration up to 125 people, a single Agile release train. If you then need to scale beyond that, we have large solution SAFe, where we are building a single solution but needing hundreds and hundreds, potentially thousands of practitioners to work together. And then portfolio SAFe gives you a configuration where you might be concerned with multiple different solutions, and you need a way to implement lean portfolio management to help coordinate your investment across those multiple solutions. So there's some nice configuration built into the framework. And of course, Nada talked about the case studies earlier. There's some great case studies on the website, different size organizations applying SAFe successfully. So yeah, I hope that's useful.
So Alun Owen has just wanted to add a comment here, and he says, just to refine, I was thinking of a development team being around 20 people.
Okay.
Yeah, and let me say a couple of things, then Nada might want to add a few things. You know, the smallest configuration of SAFe is essential SAFe. And don't forget, we're bringing together not only the team level, but some of the program level roles. So once you consider the business owners, the product manager, the system architect, it may be you're getting close to that 50 number. But even if you're below it, within the essential SAFe configuration, there's what we call 10 essential elements. And there's a nice article about those on the website you can access. Even if you chose not to apply everything within that configuration, perhaps you'd find it useful to borrow some of the aspects of how we define features. Or perhaps you'd find it useful to think about how you could use roadmaps or even PI planning to help coordinate the work. So you can certainly use different elements of essential SAFe. You're not confined to use everything. Beyond 50 people, you probably do want to look at using all 10 of those elements because they really help to guarantee some level of success. But the framework's meant to be seen as a framework, and you're meant to be able to configure it for your particular need. Did you want?
Yeah, did you want to add something, Nader?
No, Andy, I think you covered everything we need to. You know, if the organization is just 20 in total, then, as you said, just look at the framework and choose what applies to you.
Exactly. I think we can say that from Value Glide, we've trained businesses of all sizes. So definitely large corporations as well as smaller teams within an organization or just a small business in itself. Even as small as just 5-6 people we've actually trained. So options are available, and we're always keen to discuss the needs for each of those specific organizations. So we have another question from Murali Naid, who's asking, how do we typically determine capacity for a PI? Is it based purely on cumulative story points for the PI or the available capacity of team members working on that PI?
And do you want me to take that, Andy, and then you can fix it?
Go ahead, Nada.
Yeah. So I get the question is really if the Agile release train, the art is formed for the first time, we have a formula, if like a method for calculating the capacity. We only use that once when we're starting off. After that, we use velocity. In other words, we use evidence of what the teams are capable of delivering. And that's what we use to decide how much work can be taken into PI. Now, if you want, I can explain what the capacity allocation for the first time is, and we can do that. That's basically we get 1 point per person. So 8 days for a so we get 8 points for a 2-week iteration. So that's what we'd say. We get 8 points per person for a 2-week iteration, only for the people who are contributing to the development of the solution. So a product owner, for example, doesn't count. A Scrum Master doesn't count. Anything you want to add to that, Andy?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just say a bit about, because you cover that, but maybe I'll say a bit about the PI planning itself, because if you think about the PI planning, which is this event happening every 10 to 12 weeks when the whole Agile release train comes together for 2 days, it's really trying to answer 2 questions. So on behalf of the teams, it's trying to answer the question, why? Why should we care about this? Why should we feel inspired? And that is solved by the product managers, the executives standing at the front of the room communicating the vision. But the second half of PI planning is about the what. What can we actually commit to for the next 10 to 12 weeks? And during the PI planning event, those features are taken in by the teams. They're broken down into user stories. And the teams do the same familiar methods that you've seen Scrum teams do for many, many years. They're going to size the stories. They're going to estimate their capacity. And they're going to load their iterations until they feel not comfortable to take in any more work. But the important part and how PI planning finishes is with a commitment made by the teams to the plan. So the teams are the one who ultimately commit to say, we're happy with this plan that has been built. And if any teams aren't happy, we continue the planning process until we get at least a level of confidence that we can work with going forward. So that's a really important point just to remember, that the PI planning is a commitment from the teams that they're happy with the amount of work planned and they feel they can actually deliver that plan.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. In the interest of time, we're running out of time. So I wanted to say to all attendees, we will be happy to answer any additional questions that you may have on emails. Please write us on hello@valueglide.com. I'm going to leave the last words now to Nader just to close the webinar. As some of you have a question as well during the webinar, we will send out the recording so you can go back and revisit what Nader and Andrew has explained today. But please, Nader, if I can just add you to close with how we can help your organization.
Thanks, Emma. Sure. So let me just see. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. How can we help? Kept it very, oops, it disappeared. Can you still see my screen? Okay, we kept it very simple. We can help with safe implementations as well as safe training. So that's what we do. We help organizations with their safe journey, and also we provide training. And what's not on the slide is that we are a silver partner, Scaled Agile silver partner. So I think with that, we conclude, unless there is anything Emma or Andy want to add.
I just want to add to the remaining attendees, as mentioned in the beginning, that this is a webinar series. This is our second webinar of 2. So, the first and the second one. We're looking at having several others throughout the year. So please stay tuned. The 18th of June is our next upcoming webinar. We will send out the information to all the attendees and all the interested people, of course, in this webinar. And we hope to see you then. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks.